Ty, welcome back to the HardwoodKnocks podcast. I don't even know how many times you've been on the pod at this point because that's how many times it's been. We are back with our annual tradition of the Milwaukee Bucks look ahead. Before we cannonball in, though, I have to ask the most important question of this episode. How the hell are you?
You know, my heart hurts watching Giannis and Greece lose to Germany in Eurobasket. Anytime I have to watch Giannis lose, it's not fun. Of course, that is how the last NBA season ended too. So you go from a summer where Giannis doesn't lose any series to watching him lose two is tough. But otherwise, I'm good. I'm excited. I can't believe media day and the season is basically already here. We're already back, but I'm not mad at it because as you do as well. Love the NBA, so I'm ready for it.
I love the NBA, and the takes are getting way too concerning during downtime where it's like, okay, we
Yeah.
need you had the WNBA to distract you too. Like they were going through that playoff run was fun. Shout out to the Aces, by the way, for winning. But like, just when you get like into like end of August and then to the opening day of training camp, the takes and the discourse just gets so bad.
Yeah,
So
breaking news, Giannis isn't that good. That seems to be one of the main offseason talking points that keeps coming back up. I'm not sure about that one, but yeah, I don't even want to talk too much about it. It's obviously ridiculous.
the Bucks, though, you had mentioned this on Twitter a while back that you felt they were being overlooked, and I feel like no one's really talked about them this offseason because I feel like the prevailing theme of how they went about their offseason business was if Khris Middleton was healthy, we would have at least made the conference finals. And I think you can base that off talent retention and then also just using the mini MLE on someone who is not going to play for a pretty big chunk of the season. Would you say that's just one, an accurate description of their approach, and two, accurate in how they viewed it? Is it really just we're fucking good? Khris Middleton will hopefully be healthier at some point this season after he gets over the wrist injury, and we're just going to crush it in the East, especially now that we have no idea who's really going to be. We have an idea, but we know that Ime Udoka is not going to be the one coaching the Boston Celtics this season.
Yeah, I'm hoping that Ime getting suspended for a year wasn't part of their calculus because that'd be a really weird NBA conspiracy if they had known about that for months. But no, I think saying I don't want to boil it down all down to Khris in one series because I think that's overdone and Bucks fans were on the other side of that with Bucks Nets the year prior, and I do think it just gets to be such a if ifs and buts were candies were nuts kind of talking point. But I think generally for the Bucks, I brought the Midwestern out early here, but generally for the Bucks, I think organizationally they want to be like the Spurs, and Giannis is that kind of Tim Duncan stabilizing figure in an organization. I mean, for to look no further than the loss to Miami in the bubble, I think there's a decent list of orgs who that might have just broken right there. Giannis is a year away from potentially getting out of Milwaukee at that point. It goes as poorly as possible in the
Should we
highest
start the clock on
stakes.
that again, by the way? Now that he's
Yeah,
like, yeah.
yeah, he's going to
He didn't
Chicago.
win
They
last
just
year, though.
congratulations to Costas who gets another job because of no. Costas had a good summer. Costas had a good summer. I don't want to disrespect Costas Antetokounmpo, but congrats to him for getting another NBA job. Maybe I think it's a training camp deal, but he is that kind of, and not to do a direct player comparison, but that kind of Duncan-esque guy you can build a franchise around who is not going to blow up the team every couple of years, who believes in organizational stability and all of this. So I think it should be a surprise to no one that the Bucks look at this past summer as a successful offseason by keeping Bobby Portis, keeping Pat Connaughton, keeping Wesley Matthews, keeping Jevon Carter, drafting a rookie they seem really excited about in MarJon Beauchamp, and adding someone in Joe Ingles who is entirely a question mark based on his health and that he's coming back from the ACL. But if he is healthy and able to look anything like the player he was in Utah, even at the later end of Utah, his shot creation off the bench could help alleviate probably their biggest concern right now. And that clearly in that Celtics series, not to go back and just be as granular as if they had Khris they would have won, or as obtuse as that. But they didn't have enough shot creation, and that was pretty clear all throughout. So you hope to not have to do another series without Khris, but you also hope that maybe Beauchamp or maybe Ingles or maybe George Hill, if he can get healthier. He had some pretty serious back and neck issues last season that clearly he was not right in the playoffs. I think maybe he's just washed, but I think the injuries played into it as well. I think they're hoping that one or more of those three guys can help them alleviate that issue. And of course, they can have Khris back too. So I don't think it's as simple as, oh, we should have won. We don't need to do anything. I think it's more, we have a lot of good players. We like our guys. We'd have very little room to pivot if we didn't like our guys anyway because of the spot they're in with all their guaranteed money and all the contracts. So I think it just made perfect sense. And I'm glad that they didn't unnecessarily rock the boat.
I can't even like, I didn't understand what was wrong with George Hill because there were so many things wrong with George Hill, but we'll get into that a little bit later. That was just all I had. Like the neck stuff was all of a sudden just crept up. That was a bummer. What the Joe Ingles signing specifically, which is probably, I mean, unless you're me and think that MarJon Beauchamp is going to be a multi-time MVP, the Joe Ingles signing was probably the most prominent move that they made. I was higher on it in the moment, and then I thought about it a little bit more and was less high on it. And then West is coming back, Jevon Carter is coming back, and I was probably neutral on it. Where did you land with it? Do you think there's a risk in using what was your best spending tool this summer on someone who won't play right away? Does it just reinforce that they don't give a shit about the regular season? And I think mainly just what do you think that he really adds to this team, or how much of a difference do you think his shooting and playmaking in the half court can make for them?
Yeah, I think it certainly reinforces the idea that Milwaukee's got postseason goals, right? Like they can finish third in the East, they can finish second. I don't think they want to finish, anywhere near the play-in because that's obviously a different level of risk. But they're not all that concerned. If they're first, second, third, those are all fine. You can make it and win the finals from those seeds, as we've seen. Teams, I think, generally, especially teams who have been on long playoff runs before with the same core, they don't care that much. So I think certainly that is reinforced by it. But I think also I was pretty whelmed, I think appropriately whelmed at the time of the signing. I know my co-host Rohan was in shambles at the idea of signing Joe Ingles as the main move, the main new player brought in through free agency, the only new player brought in through free agency because they just brought everyone else back. Maybe literally everyone. If Jordan, we'll see how the Jordan Wara thing goes.
It's weird that he's just floating around out there. By the way,
I've got theories. I'm doing the Pepe Sylvia Always Sunny thing, connecting dots to Utah and Brooklyn or whatever. But he's just chilling. With media days this weekend as we record, so hopefully we have some Jordan Wara news at some point. But I think you look around at guys who went for around the mid-level, and outside of Otto Porter going to Toronto, I'm not sure you see that many where you go, oh, that would have been way better for Milwaukee than a 1-year deal on Joe Ingles. And I think it's very purposefully 1 year because they could use non-Bird to bring him back at the same amount if both sides are happy, or they could cut bait and not have 2 more years of a guy who is an older player coming off of a very serious injury on their books, which could be a detriment to the Bucks going forward. So I mean, you look at like a Dallas getting JaVale McGee for the full MLE. Like JaVale's fine, but the Bucks clearly didn't really need him that much. Chicago uses a little bit of it on Andre Drummond again, like. Cool. I don't look at that many other players who were really available to the Bucks who actually got that contract and go, oh, I really wish they had gotten this player instead. I think John Wall I would have loved, but it seems like the Clippers, there's more room for him to play there and be on ball. I think that makes a lot of sense for him. So I think it's fine overall. I think it's a fine flyer. And I think if he does get healthy, as they seem to, they've been floated Christmas as a time he could return. I think he could add a lot of very useful things to the Bucks. They could use more, just shot creation and ball handling on the bench, and that's something they don't have a ton of, at least on ball. So there's a theoretical world where he gives the bench a really nice jolt alongside players who really prefer to be off ball more than on ball that the Bucks do bring off their bench.
Are you at all worried? And I think the only Otto Porter Jr. was a good name to mention. He clearly wanted to go to Toronto.
Yeah,
His girlfriend is from there, I believe. And then the name I focus on, and I just want to know like why Brooklyn are the vitals on him that bad? Did he really want to play in Brooklyn that badly? But TJ Warren at the minimum, I would have given him the entire mini MLE if I were the Bucks, because if he doesn't pan out, I just think he had a better chance of making a difference than Joe Ingles. And I think my main question with Joe Ingles, I think he'll shoot better this year when he's healthy, and the playmaking will it'll sustain. Even if he can be a little sloppy out of the pick and roll, he just did not look good last year before he was injured. So are you at all concerned about like what he'll be like defensively, or do you not assign much concern there because this, I think when you start to get into the nuts and bolts of the Bucks roster, this is clearly not someone they envision as being a part of their closing unit. Like there would probably be 2 or 3 guys I would estimate in front of him to round out what I think there are probably like 4 sure thing spots in their closing lineup right now when they're healthy.
Yeah, I think that's the nice thing about where the Bucks are at right now is they do have so many guys who you can really just kind of not even pencil but pen into important roles on the team in the rotation that for players I think kind of oddly because they're on separate ends of their careers, but like Ingles and Beauchamp are both in it's fine if there's warts because the Bucks shouldn't need them to do a ton either of them. But if they play their way into more, that's terrific, right? That's a win. If Ingles really takes time to get healthy. And not saying I have any insight on him with the Jazz or whatever last season, or I think Blazers. I don't think he actually played there. But, sometimes I think players in other teams are either through their own volition or by the teams are encouraged to, make sure they get out there and that they're playing, that they're, active. And the Bucks of recent years have been very proactive in making sure like you're not going to play until you're right. I think we saw that with Brook Lopez, who I know we'll talk about more, but it took him forever to come back. And I think that's better than getting him back earlier when he's not all the way ready. I think PJ Tucker, he was playing for a bad Rockets team. The Bucks traded for him and shut him down for a couple of weeks and said, you're going to get all the way healthy. Like we're not prioritizing February games. So it wouldn't surprise me if Ingles, maybe we don't see him as early as some reports have been, but I think he'll look as right as he's going to look. Maybe there's some rust. Maybe he needs to get in shape. But I think injury-wise, the Bucks will be a good fit for him to make sure he's really ready to return and that they do it the right way. So I'm not overly worried, both because I don't think they'll need to rely on him, and I really do trust this team, this medical, this strength and conditioning staff. Suki Hobson's done a great job with Bucks players. I think this is probably as good of a spot as any for an injured veteran to come back into the fold.
I want to make this part clear because Bucks fans on YouTube are super active, which I appreciate. And maybe because the Eurostep podcast is so nice to Hardwood Knocks, we get some spillover from that. The Bucks have decided, and as you and Rowan have discussed, they're not like Giannis as the lone big is not a thing that they're focused on. I still think it's kind of important to have that option come playoff time. I know you're of the belief that, Bobby Portis and Giannis is fine to go with that look. But I've seen this framed nationally as, can Ingles give them any minutes as a 4 next to Giannis? The answer to me there would probably be no, unless he's just all of a sudden a dynamo defensively. Again, I'm talking about Joe Ingles. But is there anyone on this roster right now other than Bobby Portis that you think unlocks those types of looks? And if you just completely think that it's not going to be important when they get to it's not going to be important in the regular season. This team is a machine. They're going to win 50 plus games. Giannis is fucking spectacular. But is there any player on this roster that you can identify as, hey, maybe that's something we could try, or is there a downsizing lineup where maybe there's not, maybe it's technically Middleton who's your 4 then, but what does the makeup of such a unit look like insofar as it ever needs to exist?
Yeah, I think it's most likely out of the current guys that it would be maybe just both of at the 3-4, Khris Middleton and Pat Connaughton. And I think those two have enough size and range that most of the 4s in the league are not going to totally bully them. I think just generally there is a rebounding gulf between Giannis and another big and not those lineups. And I think part of that is Giannis obviously gobbles up rebounds and is, built like and is a great rebounder. But the load he carries offensively, I think it's hard for him to also be the box out big on the other end. And I think you see that when he's the lone big or, quote unquote lone big, he's out there with a smaller lineup where it's someone like Pat or Khris at the 4. All of those players are pretty good rebounders in their own right, but none of them are doing the work of like a Bobby Portis or a Brook Lopez in boxing out to make it easier.
Or even a PJ Tucker.
Or a PJ Tucker.
Not to reopen wounds. You want a title.
No, that's fine. But yeah, someone like that who's really going to do like that dirty work for rebounding. And I do think I'm not like throwing shade at Giannis here. It is unrealistic, I think, for a guy who in the playoffs is going to be at like 35, 16, and 6 to also be boxing out on every defensive possession. Like it's too much stuff. So I think defense, rebounding is the big one, and a little bit defensively. I think you just lose some of not having some sort of big guy there who can do, to put it plainly, big guy stuff. But I do think if you want to go small and really be switchable and everything else, Khris and Pat have enough size that they're not getting totally bullied. I think sometimes they use Pat on guys who just shoot over him. I've seen them ask him to guard Kevin Durant. It doesn't go well. That's obviously the most extreme example. But even like Gallo was getting shots up over him. He's only about 6'4". He doesn't have a huge wingspan. And then Khris Middleton
Sure,
also.
Gallo's like a 7-footer almost. He's like 6'11" or something, so he's pretty big.
No, I meant Pat is 6'4". Not
Oh
not
no, I
Gallo.
meant like
Oh
to
yeah,
have
yeah.
Gallo
Yeah,
get a
he's a
shot up
big
over.
guy.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's a big guy for sure, and hopefully he gets well soon. But some of the bigger fours do feel comfortable, it seems, shooting over him, even though he's pretty physical. And then Khris has not gotten premier defensive assignments in the last few years either. So that's just you just kind of miss some dirty work, I think, is what you miss out on. So I think Beauchamp's probably a little too small, but bringing up a
do it.
younger
I don't care.
player. Well, Mamu's an interesting one to see if they. That's not really going small. I think he's a pretty big guy too, but he was great with Georgia, so maybe he'll get some more opportunities to play with Giannis. But I think the Pat and Khris kind of duo makes some sense there, especially because and I get it's not going to be a huge talking point. Pat just gets a little bit better every year, and it's pretty bizarre
A
for
monster last year.
a role player of his age and stature. The fact that he just continues to improve, it's probably my expectations may just be unrealistic at this point. And I've got the retire his jersey thing behind me here because he was so good in the playoffs the last 2 years. But he just keeps getting better. If he takes some sort of incremental leap, maybe he'll just be like a fixture in closing lineups too, because he's become just really important to this Bucks team.
That was when he signed his extension. That was the thing that made me realize, oh, that's through his age 33 season.
Yeah.
Because Pat Connaughton's entering his age 30 season. It was just something
Yeah.
you don't realize. Khris Middleton, as of September 6th, I saw his left wrist was still in a cast. This might be answered by the time this podcast goes live, on account of Media Day, but it's like any sense of when he's supposed to be ready or how much time to start the season he's expected to miss?
Seems like not too much, with the caveat that again, the Bucks will give you no info and hold out a guy as long as they feel necessary, and they have no problems doing this. And again, I will praise their actual injury process for how they handle injuries. It seems like they've done a really good job. I will not praise how much they keep people in the dark. I don't know who it benefited to just say nothing about Brook Lopez for 6 months or however long. Like, really, our rival teams on a day-to-day basis, you want to affect their game planning and shut up. It doesn't matter. Maybe they just didn't know. Who knows? Whatever. But
sometimes silence is indicative of ignorance. So
that's that. It could be. It could be. We'll see. We'll see how this Khris thing goes, right? But he talked to Jim Ozwarski of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel in a piece that I think just went up this week. And Khris said he'd like to play opening day. He's not sure. He's going to go with the doctors and everything, but his hope is. So it seems like based on that, it shouldn't be too much time, if at all. But it wouldn't surprise me, again, if they're going to be extra cautious. They want Khris in May more than they want him in October, right? So he may miss a couple of games, but hopefully he'll be ready to go. And he says his legs feel great. Those were the major issues. This wrist thing kind of just sprung up. So
I have two starting lineup related questions. Let's assume when they're fully healthy, who is the fifth starter? Is it even a question at this point? I've seen everything from Grayson Allen, Wes Matthews to Pat Connaughton as the choices here.
Yeah, I think, it's really a testament to Wes that I'm going to say him to start. And maybe he doesn't start the season starting. We really don't know which way they're going to go. And I think certainly Pat is probably the best overall case in terms of offense and defense, because Wes is just going to give you the least offensively on average. Although he has like 2 spry moments per game where he really wows me. Again, it's not like he's like doing a 360 dunk, but he like flashes to the rim and makes a layup. And I'm like, oh my God, Wes Matthews still got it. But I think Wes, just the way he played last year in the aggregate, regular season and playoffs, the body of work there, he's been the best of those sort of 2-guard options. I think Pat Connaughton's been quite good, but having Jrue and Wes together defensively has been really beneficial for the Bucks, and they've really been able to make it hard on opposing ball handlers. And then that plus Giannis and Brook on the back line. Bud loves defense. The Bucks love winning through defense, and really the way Giannis plays, I think the teams are inclined to be defensive grinders who score enough points. That's been the best Bucks teams these last few years. So I think Wes probably has the inside track to start. I think Grayson certainly has the next best case. I think obviously he spent a lot of time last season starting. He got the nice extension where he's getting paid $8.5 million a year or whatever. He was great against the Bulls, terrible against the Celtics. I think that's a player who will benefit from more talent around him and being asked to do less overall. It wouldn't surprise me if he started either. The outside choice, of course, is MarJon Beauchamp. I do think he'll play, especially early when guys are out, Ingles and maybe Khris for a little bit. Because, Dante played a ton when he was a rookie. Like, they just don't use firsts often. But when they do, they want those guys to develop and play.
I clung to that when you talked about it on the Euro step because I asked the question about it. Will MarJon Beauchamp get a chance to play as a rookie? And you and Mr. Cotty had talked a lot about, well, look what they did with Dante DiVincenzo. So I'm clinging to that. I want to see so much MarJon Beauchamp this season.
I think we will, especially, there's going to be games where guys are either banged up or they're sitting out. The rookie is going to get to, I think, play quite a bit in some of those games. I mean, there's some games they'll outright punt, but I think games where, 2-3 guys are sitting out for whatever reason, we'll see a good amount of Beauchamp there. But I think he would have to, and I don't even want, and you maybe, you have free license to, we're trying to not be too optimistic about, a guy picked in the mid-20s or whatever.
Yeah, I can't help it. I'm sorry.
He would really have to blow the doors off to become the starter. That'd be pretty, he'd have to be very impressive, I think, given all the vets that are here. So I'll put it on the table, but like just barely on the table.
If Middleton does miss some time to start the season, what does the starting lineup then look like? Is it West plus who are you putting in Middleton's place?
I think Grayson's always going to be in when Khris is out because I think the spacing is really important then. Like, Beauchamp projects to be, hopefully a pretty good shooter, but it's still a question mark. West is hit or miss with the jumper. It's on, it's off, it depends. He had a pretty substantial lull during last season, but got it together by the playoffs. Because West has the heart of a champion. But need to get him that first ring this year, man. That's probably one of my biggest, obviously all the Giannis stuff, but getting West a ring would just be so cool. But anyway.
It's a while that he was unsigned to start last year.
He really he said, who knows, it makes a better story after the fact, right? But he said he just wanted to play for the Bucks. And apparently he was like blowing up the front office and ownership lines like, yo, sign me, I can help. And then he did.
True, retire his jersey number right now.
Right? I got to get another one of these next to the Pat Connaughton one. Or the 24 one. It's just 24. It's not branded Pat Connaughton. But what was I saying?
Talking about why it would be Grayson and Wes in the.
I just think they need Grayson's spacing. Thank you. And Wes is hit or miss with the shooting and scoring. So I think if Khris is out, we'll see Grayson. And then we did have a podcast about this, like back when the Khris news first came out, the injury. It would be really fun if they let like Beauchamp and Grayson start together in that scenario, just because you just want to look at him because, it's early in the year. We don't care that much about the regular season, and there's clearly a rotational hole. Like, instead of having West play a bunch more minutes to compensate, like throw the rookie into the fire and see what he can do next to these star players. So I think that would be my preferred, like most fun and like really why not scenario if Khris is out for a couple weeks is like, let's do Grayson to keep the spacing there for Giannis and Jrue and Brook really. And then let's throw out Beauchamp, even if he's like a nominal starter, only plays 20 minutes a game. Let's just see what he looks like with that group because that could be a whole lot of fun.
I'm all for that.
I do.
Brook Lopez. What did you make of him when he came back from his back injury last year? It was such a small sample where he did look like a step or two slower to me, but how much value can you ascribe to really how much time he was playing versus how much he actually missed? And so is there any reason for concern or just general impressions of him coming back from that injury?
Yeah, that overall, I was actually pretty happy with how he played and looked after he got back. I thought more or less he reminded me of the same old Brook, which has never, at least in Milwaukee, and probably not ever, has been someone you would categorize as fast or quick. But he was, from that first game back, effective in the drop coverage. And after bashing it because of Bud sticking to it too much for years, the season where he didn't play at all, we've never missed drop coverage so much. No fan base has ever said, I wish we had someone who could play drop coverage more than Bucks fans last season. Like, I am not kidding. Every single person watching, for all he did on offense, Boogie Cousins or Bobby Portis, try and drop, just not good, man. Just very not good. And seeing Brook back there holding that back line. I think it was the Utah game in Utah, the first time they won in Utah in quite a long time. That's going to be an easier thing to do now for the next couple of years, but was not easy to do for the last several years. And they won that game, and I thought, he did what he does, and I think that's all you really looked for. By the end of Game 7, Celtics ends up going so bad, and maybe that game in itself could make him look worse. But I think the strategy there was just like, let's hope Grant Williams misses and just try and gain like a crazy edge somehow in this series because we don't have the firepower and we can't go small and keep up with this team anymore. And it just didn't work, and whatever. They ran out of gas. But I think Brook looks like Brook, and it's really now more of less concern about this year and more about both contractually and with his age and decline and whatever else. How much longer can he look like that? He's on the expiring deal, and obviously he's not going to be your starter for the next 10 years, right? All of Giannis's career. So trying to figure out who else has that skill set, that a real threat to space the floor, but can be a true center and really play defense at the 5. It's not a lot of guys out there. So now it's more like, how many more good Brook years can we get, even if he's not maybe as spry as he was in 2019?
Yeah, I do think there's probably not enough credit given to how important his 3-point volume is. And like him hovering around close to 5 attempts per game when he came back during the regular season was good. Hit those at almost 36% clip. That gets like halved on both fronts in the playoffs. And so he's someone who could very much be a bellwether for how dynamic their offense is looking in the half court. And you sort of touched upon this. The Bucks were 14th outside garbage time and points allowed per possession last year. They were 24th after the trade deadline. Was that simply a matter of, one, opponents shot like 1,000,000,000% over the second half of the season on like log mid-rangers, and then on top of that, you're missing Brook? Or was there anything, and then of course you're allowing threes, opponents were hitting threes, or is there something more sinister at play there?
Yeah, I think mainly all the regular season stuff was Brook. And I would have to pull up the numbers to confirm. And I guess it wouldn't take too long to look at just how they played in general with him on versus off. But the defense just clearly wasn't the same most of the time without him. They had some nice moments. And it seemed like for a few weeks, prior to him getting back, it did seem like maybe they had figured out how to live with him more. But clearly they really were craving to have that center, that defensive presence there. And so much of what they've done, really all of it has been built around Brook Lopez. Like the Budenholzer Bucks have always had Brook back there, and he's always been really important to them. And I think the reason, they still finished third, which I still can't believe, given some of the bad basketball that we watched last season. But I think that's why, they were closer to the middle of the pack there in the Eastern playoff run than near the top of it where you might expect them to be. They just really struggled to defend to their elite level without him, even with Giannis and Jrue. So, yeah, I think a lot of it probably comes down to missing Brook Lopez and then trying to reintegrate him to the team.
Yeah, and look, the defense was actually worse with him on the court last season per cleaning the glass, but opponents shot 7.7 percentage points worse at the rim with him on the court. And that's like his bread and butter there. And then if you start to dig into, which I'd done for a previous project, like some of the lineup combinations that he was a part of, where there's, I think the second most, and this is, if I'm wrong, it's off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure the second most used lineup with Brook Lopez had both washed up or injured George Hill and then Grayson Allen. It's like, that's really a lot to have to cover up for if those are your two guys in the backcourt. But it was just like, and 14th is not the end of the world defensively. Let me be that clear. But when you look at the talent the Bucks have and just Giannis and Jrue, even Middleton being, like you said, not someone who's on premier assignments or who's probably been the idea of Middleton on defense is probably better in theory than practice. Someone who's solid there. And then the season that Pat Connaughton had for them, it was just striking to see like sort of what they were after the trade deadline. This is my annual question, though. It's the annual Giannis always gets better question. Last year, shoots a career high from mid-range, especially from on those long twos. Do you, one, like buy into that sustaining? And what, insofar as it can even exist at this point, what is the next frontier for Giannis? Is it just like, oh, he shot 37% on 1.8 pull-up 3-point attempts per game or something? Like, is that just what the next frontier would be for him?
Maybe. I think it's probably just continued improvement, though, on the mid-range jumper and also the playmaking, which I think has also taken strides really starting around the championship postseason. But then still, even then, I think that was one of the things that maybe stood out most when he was with Greece this summer was he's out there with Yorgos Papagiannis and like the floor is spacing is far from ideal and everything else. But
Former
his feel
lottery pick, George Papagiannis. Shout out
former
King.
almost potential buck according to some reports earlier this summer that then they signed Serge like the next week and it was like, well, so much for that. But his command of the floor and the passing angles he's able to work, I think he continues to get a better feel for the game, more awareness, and just more ability of, I think he's gotten better too in the sense of like, okay, I'm really gonna feed my teammates for 3.5 quarters. I'll score when I have good looks, but then when the game matters, okay, it's gonna go through me now for 10 straight possessions, and I'm gonna shoot on 8 of them, right? Like his feel, his able to command a game, his ability to command a game, I should say. I think has come a long way, but I think outside of that, I do think it's the mid range game and even really kind of like more post game that's going to be big for Giannis. I think that's something that I've seen him take step forward in, and you mentioned the statistics there. And I think that is just more important. I think the three for him is always going to be more of it's almost a possession punt sometimes, and it's like it's great if he makes it, but it just seems like he's like tired or just needs a possession off, so he just shoots a three. I think him having a better post up game, and it's progressed, but being more reliable from there, being able to take advantage of the mid range space versus the 3 point line space, I think that's going to be still, at least for this year, the main improvement we see. And the growth there has been really encouraging. Also, he shot free throws really well in Europe, and if that alone that could change Giannis's game pretty substantially if he's like comfortably 75% from free throw, given how often he gets to the line, especially now with the transition take rule in play for this season in the NBA.
I'd be curious to see if he can take the pull-up jumpers at like a higher processing speed where it's not
Yeah,
so much reactive to the space that he's being given, where he's almost stumbling
right.
into it. It's like, this is a move. I'm not saying he has to dance with the ball in his hands. That's not the way that he plays. But it seems like that could technically be like the next
Oh
frontier
yeah,
for him too. And I'm with you on the passing. There's the way to frame it, and I just use the verbiage is he used to be like this reactive passer, which worked because of all the attention he drew. But now he's like also a proactive passer. It's like, oh, this
yeah.
dude, the caps lock playmaker on a bunch of possessions.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing about Giannis. That's the reason he's here, right? Is there's been 10 stages of his career probably at this point where a lot of folks would maybe say, I'm great. I'm really good. He's an NBA player, then he was an all-star, then he was a franchise player, superstar, etc., etc. And he's just never happy with it. He just always wants to add more and be better, and it's really a rare kind of person who's wired that way. I think a lot of great NBA players and great athletes or whatever are, but Giannis certainly is, and I think it stands out. But yeah, I think his processing, he had some nice kind of little like between the legs, as Katie would say, hezzy pull up Jimbos in Greece. And it's like, oh man, if he's gonna be doing stuff like this, like more proactively, you just don't know what to do about him. You already don't know what to do about
Right.
him, but I really don't know what you do about him if it's like you give him 5 feet of space and he's just launching into a effective pull up game.
Buy or sell this. Jrue Holiday now has one of the most lethal step back jumpers in the NBA.
Regular season, buy. He makes him fall down. I think Drew's offensive game in general has like been so difficult to get a handle on because he does so many things so well. The step back three has kind of become like his signature shot. It feels like every week there's a new thread about he's second only to Steph Curry in step backs on volume per whatever.
He shot, well, I have the number right here. He shot 52.7%
Yeah.
on step back threes. That was 93 attempts. And
Yep.
he made 69 of 125 step back jumpers overall, including 2 pointers. That is an effective field goal percentage tie
He's
of
got
roughly
like 90.
75.
Oh,
That's
75.
fucking high.
I think it's good because Jrue has some foibles at the rim sometimes. I don't know if he inherited that from Eric Bledsoe in the Bucks starting point guard spot
You
or
would think
what.
he wouldn't because he is like, he's built like
He
a,
gets there. That's the
yeah.
thing. He gets there. He's so strong. He gets there. And then there's just I know Marcus Johnson, who's phenomenal, has reported on the Bucks broadcast before that like he's specifically working on finishing with both hands and trying to improve that. And that would be great. I think at this point it's just pretty clear like the Bucks ecosystem with the three guys, it works because they're all there. And I think we saw it doesn't work if any of them are not there against the Celtics. They all need each other to some certain extent. And I think Jrue needs, to not be such a focal point on offense, especially because he is such a focal point on defense for the Bucks. And he really is, in terms of the perimeter play, he is the guy at this point. So, I buy it. I think it's a good shot for him. I think it works sometimes, especially in the playoffs. Seems like he tries to over rely on it and he forces it a little bit and it doesn't work. But I think, over a pretty solid sample across the whole season, clearly it's a shot he's comfortable with and that works for him. And it's almost one of those that the Bucks try not to maybe rely on that, but it's kind of feels like found money when he does knock down a couple of those in the game. And it's just like, because sometimes points can just not be the easiest to come by for this team. So seeing Jrue just size somebody up, step back, and of course there's almost always attention on other players plus him when he's being guarded. So I think that helps him generate some more space because, his defender's probably kind of cognizant of like, is Brook Lopez about to screen me? Like, where's Giannis? Got to account for Giannis. And then Jrue pops back and nails a step back. So I buy it, but I'm not like, Jrue is the next James Harden level buying it, if that makes sense.
Is that, so you kind of already answered this, is that sort of what was at play? He was all over the place offensively in the Celtics series. That and he had some problems finishing at the rim. Those were pretty prevalent there. Was it like just that was a larger symptom of who Jrue Holiday is, and then you just tacked on the fact that Khris Middleton wasn't there?
Yeah, I think more or less. I mean, even when Giannis was healthy in the 21 run, there's still some times where he would just fluctuate wildly, and he'd miss bunnies against the Nets, and then drill a couple of those step back jumpers and get the Bucks back in the game late in that Nets series. So I think that is, it's a little frustrating because Khris has a little bit of this too. I think that's just who those guys are, and it works because they can pick each other up, and as long as they don't both go bad at the same time, which was like. Watch game 2 of the Suns final series with the Bucks. That was that. And those guys are just wired differently because they laughed about it after and then, worked to roll off 4 straight wins. So I think that's kind of just who Jrue is. And then certainly him and Giannis and everyone having to carry more load. It wasn't good for anyone. I think Jrue, Grayson, it kind of stood out the most. And Bobby Portis too, as like they would all be in such a better place if that, 22 points a night guy who just doesn't really need any help for a lot of his shots was there, everyone would be in such a better. And then Giannis is just Giannis. He was just more tired, but he still did all the Giannis stuff somehow.
We already talked about MarJon Beauchamp, so I'll frame it this way. MarJon Beauchamp needs to do what to become a concrete member of the Bucks rotation this year?
Defend and just do something offensively. And that may sound stupid, but I honestly think if he doesn't defend, he's not going to play. And I think that is part of the reason why the Bucks seem to be so enamored with him is he is known as a rookie who can defend. And I think he showed that a bit at Summer League, and clearly physically he has the tools for that. And he is like the kind of player who I think understands he's got to be a defender to be an NBA player. So I think that is like the rosiest part of his projection. I do think he'll defend, but if he doesn't, he won't find that many minutes because the Bucks do not love guys who do not defend for the most part, especially young players. And then,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah, you go.
I was gonna say what disarmed me about him in Summer League, aside from just falling in love with him, was he seemed less athletic than I thought, but the jumper seemed closer than I thought. The way he was moving without the ball looked comfortable getting shots off in the corners. And then, of course, there was the defensive hustle. I kind of expected it to be the opposite offensively. I thought this was someone who was going to rely a lot on maybe being in the open floor or just going through straight lines to the basket. And it actually made me a little bit higher on him because I was like, if the Bucks can get someone who is, playing 14 to 17 minutes a game, gets up, 2 or gets up like 3+ 3-point attempts and is shooting reasonably high on them while busting his butt defensively, that's someone who could play right away and should play right away for this team.
Yeah, 100%. I think the hope is the athleticism will translate more when he's out there with like Giannis and Khris versus as good as they were in Summer League, Mamu and Lindell Wigginton.
Playing with perennial all-stars,
Yeah, a little bit. But yeah, I think the shot looked pretty good. I'm just gonna be a little hesitant until we see it, just because NBA shooting is hard and whatever else. But I think the thing offensively that stood out, defensively, I thought he closed out on shooters really well. He seemed older than a rookie. Like it's easy, I think, to blow by and leap out of your shoes, and I just thought he was very calm and controlled on defense, which was great. Offensively, the shooting was nice. He worked the corners well. I really like that they had the ball in like Wigginton's hands and Mamu's hands. So Beauchamp got a better approximation. I hate at least when like an NBA rotation guy gets drafted who's going to be a role player, and then in summer league he's got the ball in his hands the whole time, and it's like that wouldn't have helped Beauchamp at all. Like that's clearly
Right.
not what he's going to do with the Milwaukee Bucks. They had him off ball, they had him in the corners, but most importantly, probably they had him work in the dunker spot, which is so huge to the Bucks. Is utilizing that horizontal part of the court, basically under the backboard and around the rim there. And he was able to get there and complete passes when he got the ball because he is pretty athletic. He's got long arms. He can take good paths to get the ball into the hoop from there. And that's going to be huge for him playing with the Bucks too. You got to move around Giannis and take advantage of that space. So I think he's poised to be able to get that rotation minutes, but it's going to start with the defense. And then really it's like thriving on offense would be great, but don't gum up the offense is like the main objective when you're out there with Giannis.
Among these three players, who's going to be most important in the regular season and playoffs, and feel free to separate it if you need to. Jevon Carter, George Hill, and Serge Ibaka.
I think Jevon most, and I think really he is like the way he played last season. The most likely scenario is it's just not sustainable. But the way he played last season, if that's actually who he is, that could like change a lot of things about the Bucks over the next assuming they find a way to keep him because he's still on a vet minimum and they're a year away from bird rights. But he was a very effective 3-point shooter who is limited in who he can guard because of just his size, but who
You guard
is
them for when they wake up in the morning.
it's like the Jose Alvarado thing where he's all over the court. He doesn't hide. He's just dogging them the whole time. And for smaller players, I think I'm not going to get too hyperbolic here, but I think one of the better guys to guard, like true point guard sized players. He's all over in the chest, making it hard to move. I think wing players and again, this is hard for everyone, but like seeing him against like Tatum and Brown, unless he was really able to get into their dribble, those guys are just a little too big and strong and got to do what they wanted. But, the real point guards of the world, Jevon Carter can really guard. The way he shot, the way he spaced the floor, the way he just fit with the Bucks. Like he really stepped in as a buyout guy with little acclaim around the league and it was a pretty seamless fit. And I do think it's maybe even a better what if than Khris Middleton because it was actually controllable. If he plays more than Hill over those last 3-4 games, it might potentially change the Celtics series. I'm not saying this would happen, this wouldn't happen, but Hill clearly didn't have it. Jevon Carter did when he played, and they won his minutes, I believe, over the course of that series. It helps that he played in games the Bucks won by a lot, but they were good with him on the court. And I think there is a shot he really carves out a role here with some like question marks, I guess, in terms of the backup backcourt and who exactly is going to do what. If he continues to play like that, shoot that well, did a little bit off the dribble too, not very much, but I think he could have a real rotational role and be very useful for the Bucks going forward. George Hill is just a huge question mark. Is he washed or was he hurt? And if he was hurt, can he get healthy and not get washed? Like that's kind of the flow chart. And there's a scenario out there where I think he can be quite good and helpful again, but I think there's also a few scenarios where it's like he just really doesn't have it anymore, which sucks. George is another guy I think with the Bucks fans and the org would love to be on a title team after he missed out on the first one or the last one as well. But he just didn't have it last year, was not able to help, and it sucked. Serge, I think so. George, I think it could depend. Serge, I think, is going to be the least day-to-day important. I think he's really there to be kind of a break glass in case of emergency guy. And I think that's why they ended up with him versus some younger center options who maybe wanted a spot where they could prove themselves and carve out more of a role. I don't know if Serge is going to play every game, to be honest. And he didn't when he was on the Bucks last year. And he re-signed. To some level, he must be okay with that arrangement. Clearly, he's proven a lot and been able to earn a lot in his NBA career. And maybe that's just fine with him. So I think there's some games where he's probably going to be quite important. But I think there's going to be some where he doesn't really factor in much at all. So I would put him last, but I'm glad they got someone there because having no one in that backup center role really hurt during the time Brook was out last season.
Yeah, I'm curious whether his back was like bothering him throughout the year, even after he returned early with the Clippers, because there was like this increased stiffness about him, and functionally he could be quite helpful to this team if he is mobile enough.
Yeah, I mean that I should that's a great point. I think as with Hill, there is also some additional upside there. I think you don't usually think about guys of that point in their career and that old as having upside, but given the injuries Hill and Ibaka dealt with, there is a chance they both look better this year than last year. You don't want to bake that in, but it's certainly possible. And he is one of those players who can protect the rim, has that true size, and can space. I mean, he took so many shots in garbage time last year, like way too many shots, man. But he can do those things too. He gives you some rough approximation of what Lopez does.
What do you view as the single biggest weakness for this team right now, whether it's just a player archetype, a specific position or skill set or whatever leading into the season? Is it the wing rotation? Is it the second unit playmaking? Like, what do you view it at the single biggest concern for you entering the regular season?
Yeah, I'd say second unit playmaking, or even just like tertiary, as I learned on the Eurostep, means specifically third. I just thought it meant outside, but like playmaking beyond Khris, Giannis, Jrue, which clearly, and again, it's I think most teams you bake in their one of their top three players being out, and it's hard for them to go win a championship. But it was very glaring, right, when Khris was out, that they just did not have enough playmaking. So, I think the hope is again like Ingles and Beauchamp can do some of that, but neither are proven, at least for this coming season, that they're going to be ready to do that. Ingles at one point was, but that was a couple of years ago, and Beauchamp has just not proven anything yet. So I'd say that's the biggest, and that's why, we're doing pods. Should they go get Jordan Clarkson, who's not a great distributor of the ball or playmaker for others, but certainly just has that juice.
He'll get his. Yeah.
He'll get his, and I think like 17 points a game last playoffs would have been transformative for the Bucks just to be able to bake that in. Or maybe if it's less on that team, maybe not. I mean, the Jazz had good offensive players too, and maybe as many as the Bucks without Middleton there. So that would have been a big help, I think. So just like scoring / shot creation outside of the big three is I think the biggest one, and the one that they have like the least good answers to. And they've shown they can do enough when those guys are healthy to get by, and their defense can be good enough. But you'd like to see some more of that. They have a lot of guys, Pat, Bobby, West, go down the line, Grayson Allen, who are really better playing with someone who can do those things versus doing them themselves. Mm-hmm. And to have someone like, the Sixers having Tyrese Maxey just like emerge onto the scene and be able to take on some of that, so transformative for guys on that team like Tobias Harris, who were overtaxed trying to do it. Like being able to add in another jolt, I think would be really important, and not having it there for sure, I'd say is probably their biggest current weakness.
And Jevon Carter becomes much more valuable to you if you have that player. Like if Joe Ingles is healthy, let's say, even if, I guess if you traded for Jordan Clarkson, like second units where you don't need Jevon Carter to really handle the ball at all, like that's just where he's going to be best suited on offense. And then you get his defensive pressure, the benefit of that.
Exactly. Yeah, he is. It's kind of Jrue-esque in a way, although obviously Jrue much better relatively on offense. But I think that ideal role is being able to not have to worry about offense as much. Again, Jrue can carry much more than Jevon Carter, but being able to have someone else that you can kind of orbit around and then just like totally wreak havoc on defense. That's a formula the Bucks clearly like.
What is something that's not being talked enough about on a national scale with regards to this team?
I think for that one, I was going to do this for the last question, but I think it probably makes sense here. Well, now it is though. Actually, now it is because it went viral today. So now let me think about this for a second. Not enough attention on a national level. I'll say I think
MarJon Beauchamp. Let's move on.
Beauchamp's a good one. I think what they've done this last offseason, it's not exciting. It's not like Horst should win Executive of the Year. But I still do think it was a pretty fine offseason. I'm fine just now I'm blasé too. But I think being able to keep all those players when typically players win championships and over the next 2 years, it just gets really hard to keep everyone. I mean, the Warriors just lost GP2 and Juan Toscano, less important, I guess. But they obviously don't retain PJ, which I think they may still be kicking themselves over the right after. But then keeping Bobby, keeping Pat, etc., and just really keeping the core together and adding at least swings at good rotation players, I think they put themselves in a really good position to contend for the next couple of years, at least until they get to the swing point on Jrue and Khris.
This question is fascinating, and I recognize it's a heavy lift to do on a podcast, but what does the 10-man rotation look like for this team? And for the Bucks specifically, it does feel like they have the the 7 or 8 guys who are locked into a certain amount of minutes. When you look at Jrue, Wes Matthews, Khris Middleton, Giannis, Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, and then I would say Grayson Allen. And so if you disagree with any of those inclusions, feel free to correct me there. But then how do you like round out if you had to like those final 2 spots when you're looking at how the minutes might be allocated?
I think it's really going to end up like the regular season this year is just going to be 82 games of figuring that out. And I don't think it's going to be set in stone early, especially not with the injuries. But I think the most obvious kind of position battle is going to be Jevon Carter, George Hill. I don't think there's room for both of those guys if the team is relatively healthy and there's no trades made, yada yada, over the course of the season. Because like, yeah, I think the top 8 of Jrue, Wes, Khris, Giannis, Brook, Bobby, Pat, Grayson, I think is more or less locked in. You know, the roles could fluctuate and change a bit, but I think those guys are all going to play. So then it's which of Hill, Carter is the backup point guard, who I think one of those two is likely to slot in at 9, unless one of Ingles or MarJon Beauchamp looks really good. And then that's where things can get really haywire. Because if Ingles comes back and looks great, maybe he knocks out both the point guards. And then maybe there is room for Beauchamp. Or maybe Serge looks good and he slides in there. So I think there's so many right now spots where I look and go, I need to see how this guy plays and figure out how they fit with the team, how healthy they are. If you're Beauchamp, how fast you look like an NBA player, which hopefully is right away. But I really think it is going to come down to like, who stays healthy, who gets healthy, and who fits in and is able to contribute, because it is, in my opinion, almost set up or designed so that there's some competition built in as we go through the season.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you there. And it was tough to like I want MarJon Beauchamp in the top 10 when we're looking at minutes, but it's like hard to include him when you consider all the factors and the veterans and just like options that they do have, because their depth has a lot of question marks, but there is depth. Like there's actual depth to this team.
Yeah, I think I don't look at it as, because what we probably talked about like 12 or so players there, 12 or 13 players. I don't look at it as they're going to have 13 guys who are like average or plus or better rotation guys. But I think by end of day, I feel pretty good they'll get to like 9 or 10 at least. And that's certainly deep enough, I think, when you look at playoff rotations. That may be too many guys for Bud, right, to narrow it down. But I think they'll certainly have enough depth. I just couldn't tell you exactly who the players will be right now, which is going to be the fun and the difficult part for the coaching staff this season.
This will be to some extent matchup dependent, I'm sure. But what do you think winds up being their go-to crunch time lineup? Is it just their starting 5?
Well, we already said we're not exactly sure what that's going to be, so I think it's still a good question. I think the most likely is I think a core thing about the Bucks is if you don't make them go small, they're happy with it. So I think if they can play Brook, they will. That's like, they've found ways to win without him, but it's typically been really hard for teams to beat them in a 7-game series if they're able to play Brook a lot and he's able to do his thing in the paint. Like they're built around that. If they can do that, they're really comfortable. It's really hard to beat them. So their preferred, I think, is probably like Jrue, Wes Matthews, Khris Middleton, Giannis, and Brook Lopez. And it's like all defense, and it's impossible to score. And the Bucks don't score a ton, but they score enough, and they grind it out. Khris makes tough shots. Giannis does Giannis. Yada yada. I think if they have to, then you look at Jrue, Wes, Khris, Bobby, Giannis. If they have to go smaller, teams make it a little too hard for Brook. They stretch the floor a little too much for him. Then I think that's the most likely pivot option. Could Pat Connaughton supplant one of Wes or Bobby? I think so, but I think I think I would lean toward Wes being in there, and then it either being Bobby Portis or Brook Lopez right now. Again, before we go through the whole season and see, does Wes regress? Does Pat get even better? Those sorts of things.
Yeah, it does seem like so it'd be the 2 and the 5 spots are the ones that are like going to be the most fungible, which is really the spots outside their big 3, which makes perfect sense. Is there a weird, oddball, quirky lineup that you would like to see this team roll out some point during the regular season?
Yeah, after watching Georgia, the country, not the Peach State in Eurobasket, I really want to see some like Mamu, Giannis, Brook Lopez lineups, because The hard part about Mamu on this team, because I think in a lot of teams you just go, yeah, he's a 4, that's that. The Bucks just have no room for 4s between Giannis and Bobby Portis. And then we talked about there'll be some points in lineups where guys like Khris and Pat scale up. That's like their hardest position. Like I was looking into today, like if the Jazz don't care about Lauri Markkanen, and we don't know this, but if they don't, right, would you want to go get him? Theoretically, like a 25-year-old guy who shoots at a plus level, it's a good fit with Giannis. But 4 is a really hard position, and I'm not sure again if the Bucks could get him. That's a different combo. It's just hard at that position. So like, can they figure out lineups where Giannis can play, or where Mamu can play with Giannis, and then another big guy? And what does that look like? And just like the burst, the shooting that Mamu has shown, I would like to see that and get a look at what he can do in those opportunities. Just because like he's gonna torch the G League again, like he did last year. I think he's better now. Like that's. You can only learn so much from that at a certain point. I'd like to see how he fits in the team construct. Not something they didn't really ever do with like Christian Wood. And now to this day, we still have to have these questions or these fights on Bucks Twitter like every 8 months. Should they have gotten rid of Christian Wood? Could Christian Wood have played a role? No, he never would have fit. Oh, he's so good it would have helped. I want to find out with Mamu. So give me Mamu at the 3.
Mine skews in a completely opposite direction, where it's just
you want to go? Yeah, no, you want to go tiny. You love Giannis and tiny guys.
So it's and the big 3 has to be included. Otherwise, like, why am I even having this lineup? So I want to see Giannis, Jrue, and Middleton. And I'm going to try and prioritize some of the spacing here with Jevon Carter so that I can get my guy MarJon Beauchamp in here, who I believe will hit enough threes to make it work. But that has the potential, I would say, to at least be like a frenetic, feisty, terrifying defensive lineup. Yeah. Does it have enough offensive upside in there? I mean, you have your 3 best creators on the floor, so hopefully they can make it work. I don't know who is... Yeah, you'll have Giannis. He could be the screen setter if Jrue Middleton has the ball. But outside of that, if he has the ball, there's not a ton of other options. I hope they try it. I don't think that they will, but that's how I skew by this point. I'm going with the pocket size lineups, even though that Giannis is a giant.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be fun if they had a lineup like that did work really well, just because they are by default and just by nature so comfortable going big. And I do think they get more uncomfortable when you go small. It would be a lot of fun if they had a go-to tiny lineup that just really went all in on spacing. And it's still defense first, but certainly like more open, more fast moving. I would have fun watching that lineup, that's for sure. Any Jevon Carter lineup is good with me.
I think that lineup would have the best chance of playing against the Clippers. That's the team that I look at. Like they might play without any like semblance of a big for stretches this season. So I'll be tuning in to both Clippers Bucks games this year.
Say we only get 2. Well, maybe we'll get up to 9.
Best of 7. That's going to be the closing unit of the NBA Finals Game 7 for the Bucks.
I'm going to make it my mission to get you like 10 million followers. If you want them or not, I'm going to share this clip ad nauseum if the Bucks close out a championship with a Jevon Carter, MarJon Beauchamp, and the big 3 line. And you would deserve everything. I mean, not the negative parts of having that many followers, but you would deserve the acclaim for sure.
It is predictions time. This team, the over-under is set at 53.5 currently. They're a tough one because I don't really think that they care about the regular season, but Giannis is just so naturally dominant that you stumble your way into 54-plus wins. But as of right now, entering training camp, that 53.5 over-under, which way would you swing on it?
I think again, probably a Bucks optimist overall. But you look at, they played 82 last year, right? I had to check because nobody on the Bucks played more than... Oh, Bobby played 72, but Giannis played 67, Jrue played 67, Khris played 66, and then if you look way down, where's Brook Lopez? Can't even find him.
Was he at like 9? What was it? He had 12 games he played last
12
year.
Games, thank you. I don't know why. 13 games. He played 1 against the Nets and then didn't play forever and then played 12 more. So I think they're going to be over, even though I agree they're certainly not going to be like, we need to win X number of games. I think they had such a mess of a season last year with maybe like 5 games that might be a little high, but honestly maybe not, where they just like put out total joke lineups because they were so injured. They just wanted to give everyone a day off. I think we'll see less of that. I think there were some extenuating circumstances with really everyone in the starting lineup getting injured at some point or another. And I don't think there's going to be perfect health this year. And it's still a short summer for Giannis in particular. But I think without having the championship into Olympics for Jrue and Khris, into short offseason for everyone around the league thing, plus being one of the teams who also played the bubble and had just had no time off, I think I would hope that they're a little bit healthier. I mean, the Ingles thing notwithstanding, and Chris's early injury. But I think if they're just healthier, even if they don't play any better, which maybe they'll play better too, I think they get up to like 55 pretty easily. So I'd take the over.
We both took the over on 54.5 last season, in case you were wondering.
So we both lost last year.
We were both wrong. I haven't made my final predictions. I'm tempted to go with the over, but I think I've said that about every single look ahead that I've recorded so far.
It's a good league, man.
It's a good league, and I'm just curious, like Giannis, as you mentioned, having the shorter offseason, then Ingles not being available right away. What if Middleton misses some time or just takes a while to reacclimate himself to game speed? So I'm just tempted to go the over because I think Giannis is the best basketball player alive, and that is just sort of not even close at this point. Where do you see them standing, though, in the larger context of the East? And that's also where their win total gets dicey because the top 8 in the East has the potential to be like a bloodbath. I mean, all of a sudden you have the Cavs with Donovan Mitchell just need to be mentioned in there. What if the Bulls get healthy? I'm not really too high on them, but Toronto is better / deeper in just 148 games. Philly, Miami, Boston, those aren't teams that are going anywhere. I would not bet anything on the Brooklyn Nets doing anything, but if they're healthy and like nothing goes wrong, like they're a title contender. It's like the East is just going to be absolutely wild. And I'm sure I left off one team because I always forget one team when I'm rattling those off. It's not the Knicks. It's not the Wizards. It's not the Hornets. That's not the team. Oh, the Hawks.
Hawks.
Like, getting DeJounte Murray and like their top 7 on that team is really good. Do you have them? And I'll just go first here. I have them sort of penciled into the almost a tier of their own, where for me, it's like whatever's going on in Boston and then them even being like tangentially related to the Kevin Durant rumors with Jaylen Brown, something just seems amiss there.
I agree. I said this. The vibes are bad there. I don't know what exactly. And obviously, this Ime thing is a whole other story. But it doesn't. And they made some good moves, I think, overall. But something feels off to me.
So I've after thought, like I have the Bucks in a tier of their own. It might be Milwaukee and Boston. I could see Philly. I'm very high on Philly this season, and I'm just smitten with Toronto. But I still think it's the Bucks, maybe Boston, and everyone else.
Yeah, I think Philly is the interesting one. I mean, this feels like well, maybe not every year, but it just feels like the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a reason to think that this is the year that they do it, and then they don't make the conference finals. So I think they could draw Milwaukee early because of the way the playoff bracket will probably be with so many good teams. But if they can't win 2 series this year, I really like just do it for once. Come on, Philly. I mean, Miami's been there like 6 times since Embiid's been in Philadelphia. I think the interesting thing for me is going to be like who's going to drop out of that presumed top tier. And maybe the Hawks don't make it, right? Maybe something else goes bad there like it did last season. But I think Miami has to probably feel a little vulnerable after, like, I think the fans there are really more shocked than anything. They weren't in on KD at all. That just seems like such a Pat Riley thing. And, their offseason was, kind of like the Bucks in terms of like, yeah, we kept a couple of our guys, but they also lose PJ Tucker. And they seem excited about the rookie, the Slovenian, but we'll see. I feel like he has some developing to do.
Yeah, I mean, Nikola Jovic is not going to, if you're relying on him to make or break your season, like you got.
Yeah. So I think Miami has to be a little tenuous, but also Lowry getting a little healthier could change a lot for them too. But yeah, I would agree. I think the Bucks, I don't know if I'd say they're in their own tier just because they were obviously vulnerable last season too. And, they didn't make it to the 3rd round of the playoffs. So I would say they're in the top tier there. I'll put Boston in, even if it does seem like, it's just going to be hard for them to have a normal season. And that can be really difficult, despite clearly they have the potential to be one of the best teams in the league. And then Philly probably deserves to be there, although I still just need to see it for a full postseason at this point. But they clearly have the talent, and they rounded out their team pretty well this summer. Miami, I think, should just be there because Jimmy can be that guy, even though the core around him really has me asking some questions. Mm-hmm. I think I'd say that's the top tier for right now. And then I think I'm not putting the Cavs there yet. I think they could be there this season. I also think like they don't actually have 4 All-Stars. They have a very good team and a lot of talent. Also a lot of questions, especially like who's actually there. I guess you'd say 3 if Mitchell and Garland are the 1-2. But, I think they have a lot of very good pieces and some big things to figure out as well. And the Bulls, I don't believe in the Bulls this year. Sorry, Chicago. And the
Yeah,
Hawks, I need to see it again.
the Lonzo news is debilitating for them. He's so
Yeah,
important to their
they needed a
defense.
shooter. They need a
And that too, yeah.
shooter, and then they don't have one.
And I think what helps the Bucks too, they clearly have a higher ceiling than some of these teams, but like Boston, which might be a stupid thing to say now, Milwaukee and Toronto feel like the least combustible teams on paper, because when you look at Atlanta or Cleveland, you're not dealing with that huge incoming new player. And then Miami, there's the age factor. Kyle Lowry looking weird last season, losing PJ Tucker. You have Philly, there's always going to be the Joel Embiid health question. And then is James Harden actually on the decline? And then Brooklyn, self-explanatory there. And so like the Bucks have just like real stability where even when they're not at their best, they are among, I'd probably say like at least the two least, they might be the least combustible team in the Eastern Conference, because look at what's happening in Boston right now. As we're recording this, we get the news that Ime Udoka is not going to resign. The fact that we're just talking about this, about the team that just made the finals, is bizarre. And then Toronto is just, they lack, I think, the apex superstar. Pascal Siakam would be a favorite MVP bet of mine this season, but like he's not. Bill him as an all-NBA. Yeah, he can be that guy, but like Giannis is, no, that's first or second team all-NBA at worst. They don't have that guy. So Milwaukee is probably the least combustible team in the East for as many questions as you and I both have about them.
Yeah, their questions are more about like, who's going to be able to execute at a high enough level, but that has been maybe like the most underrated thing, nice thing about being a Bucks fan or following the Bucks lately is like so little of my time has to be devoted to drama or like off-court things or whatever else.
Three high character all-stars is just like at the same time is almost unheard of.
I mean, they say they have a rule of like no assholes, and it's like it has to happen, and it seems like they do, because like year after year since Don Maker's trade request, nothing comes out about the Bucks. They're just like they're doing their thing.
And I don't even mean high character might be insulting to people around the league, but like low maintenance. Having three low maintenance all-stars at the same time is just bizarre. Is there anything about this team or anyone on this team that I did not ask you about, that we did not discuss, that you think we need to hit on before I release you back into the wild?
We won't do Jordan Nwora, and that's the weird one, but it's just like there's not that much to say. He's just floating there in restricted free agency. Something will probably happen. He'll probably just sign the offer sheet. Chris's contract situation, I think, is right now the big one, and I say that not because, and in the Journal Sentinel piece I referenced, it's a very good piece, and talk about like low maintenance, like it's all about how Khris and his family like putting on basketball camps, and he just like hangs out with his friends in Charleston. It's like it's the most Khris Middleton thing ever. But in talking about his contract, he says like I'd love to stay if they'll have me. Like everyone knows I want to be a Buck. You're not supposed to say that because it doesn't help in contract negotiations, but I think everyone knows that. But he's got the player option after this season that he could accept or decline, and then obviously negotiate a new deal. He's extension eligible right now. My thought all along is they're gonna get a deal done before this season and just figure it out. That's been not sourced clearly, just my thought.
Aggregate it, alert,
aggregate it. Just because I think what he said is true. I think he wants to be a Buck. I think they clearly want to have him. It's just figuring out the number now for a guy who has not been super healthy and is certainly on the other side of 30. But it's not done yet, right? So it's still, I think, worth talking about. And that's, Jrue and Giannis, I believe, are on the same term now of years. I think they've gotten a lot of the role players there now too. Obviously, they're not going to have a ton of cap space anytime soon, but figuring out what the Khris move is. Like, can you keep him for a lower AAV than $40 million? Are you too hesitant to sign him? What does he want to do? That's the big thing right now. That is like the real Bucks inflection point in the near future.
If you could have him in total with the extension, 3 years, $120 million. So it's like basically at that player option number, average annual value. Would you just do it?
I would. Ideally, it's a little less, which I guess probably doesn't matter. And I'd rather have him at that than not have him. My thought was, my hope, I should say hope, because again, it's not like I have a basis to go on or anything, but they've given him 2 huge contracts already, and he's deserved them. It's not like it was out of the goodwill of the Bucks' heart, but certainly has been well paid. I think a Lowry-like contract would be perfect for both sides if you made like 3 years, $100 million after this, which may be underpaying Khris Middleton, but also, I think we've seen around the Bucks a few guys have been willing to do things more or less like that. again, we'll see. He certainly has earned all the money he's gotten, and if he wants to hardball the Bucks for 3 at 120, people will argue. I won't argue that much, even if it doesn't age the greatest by the very end. But I think I think there will be room there for more of a give and take extension. But again, all total speculation.
So I think if you're giving him like 4 years in total where he's picking up that player option and then it's 3 and 100 would probably be pretty realistic. I guess I was more talking about like basically a 2-year, $80 million extension where you have him for 3 years. That'll be, I did not expect that was a deal that was going to get done, to be honest. So if they extend him, that'll be fascinating to look back at.
It would be the most Bucks thing if they did it, because that's been the whole thing, is like the continuity, the stability, the no drama, and being able to just like eliminate that as a talking point, I think would be, it would be something that they would certainly look to do if they felt the price was right. And again, we'll see. I think this could potentially be a thing that gets ugly and uncomfortable as we go. But I think I still hope, at least, I guess I should start saying hope, but I hope that they'll figure it out before the year, because then really all your ducks are in a row in terms of like key players for like years. Like the only one you have to worry about now is Wes and Jevon, and how you figure out keeping them or what they want, the next free agency.
Ty, this was great as always. Were you able to tell our fantastic listeners where they can find you and all the fantastic work that you do?
Yes, of course, and thank you for lying to them on behalf of my work. On Twitter at TyWindisch, TIWINDISCH. Share pretty much everything there, but also for the Eurostep / Win in 6, which is both of our Bucks podcasts at the Eurostep Podcast Network. We also do other Wisconsin sports coverage, so all of that can be found, including my Twitter, somewhere on the site as well. gspn.info. That's the central home to all of our stuff. Substack, Discord, all of it. So gspn.info. You can find all of that.
Ty is great. The Eurostep podcast is fantastic. You and Mr. Cotty have fantastic chemistry, and I love listening to you guys. Thank you so much, as usual, for coming on for this. And as you know by now, I will be pestering you again in the future.
Talk to you in 1 year, Dan. Thanks so much for having me.